There's a simple mathematical flaw in our economic systems. This flaw is at the root of economic recessions, our ever-increasing debt, and the massive gap between the rich and the poor. You might think that it is absurd that in this day and age, a simple mathematical flaw could still exist in our economic systems. Not to even mention how absurd it sounds that such a flaw is at the root of the world's economic problems. But spare me only 15 minutes to explain this flaw. I promise it will be worth your time. Over the last 5,000 years, humanity has moved back and forth between two forms of money: credit money, and gold or silver-backed money. The cycle begins with the age of the first agrarian empires. This period was dominated by credit money. This is followed by the Axial Age, which saw the rise of coinage, and the metal bullion. The Middle Ages saw a return to credit money. The age of the capitalist empires is next, with a massive planetary shift to gold and silver bullion. This age effectively ended in 1933, with the end of the gold standard. 1933 saw the return to a credit money system. However, our current credit money system is different from the credit money systems of prior ages. Under the influence of what is called fractional reserve banking, our current credit money system bears the same main characteristic as gold-backed money systems. Therefore, our current credit money period has social and economic conditions similar to that experienced during gold-backed money periods. These conditions are strikingly different to that experienced during true credit money periods. Periods dominated by credit money have stable debt levels and stable economies. In contrast, periods dominated by gold-backed money are rife with devastating debt and economic crises. Credit money periods are peaceful and lack wars and violence.
Peace.
Periods of gold-backed money are rife with wars and violence. Credit money periods are virtually free from chattel slavery and debt servitude, and feature high income equality.
I am a free man.
I'm not a slave to my debt.
No one is poor, and no one is a billionaire either.
On the other hand, gold-backed money periods have widespread slavery or debt servitude. Income equality is low, with a small minority of extremely wealthy individuals and many poor people. The middle class is enslaved to ever-increasing debt.
Yes, master.
I'm a slave to debt.
I have little money.
I'm a billionaire.
The reason why the social and economic conditions are opposingly different during credit money and gold-backed money periods is because of interest. Credit money is interest-free, whereas gold-backed money bears interest. Bank loans under our current credit money system cannot logically bear interest. It's not a matter of ideology, it's a matter of mathematics. Bank loans can only bear a credit risk premium, which is a small fee, and is already currently collected by banks. To prove this, let's go back to the beginning of money. Most economists explain the origins of money as an invention to improve on bartering.
I don't want apples, and in any case, my cow is worth far more than 3 apples.
I know what to do. I'll trade you gold nuggets, which you can then trade with another person that has to offer what you want.
Thank you.
However, this familiar story told by economists to explain the invention of money is not actually how it happened. Firstly, for almost a century, anthropologists have been dispelling the myth of barter, as historical evidence suggests a different story. That's not to say that bartering never happened, but that it only happened on a small scale, and was never the main means of trade. Secondly, coin money, like gold or silver-backed money, was not our first form of money. Credit money was first. Here's how the real story goes.
I have an extra cow that I don't need.
I need a cow.
I will accept a debt obligation in exchange for the cow.
Here's my signed debt obligation. The equivalent of 1 cow, due in 3 months' time.
Thank you.
The reason why the debtor did not offer to pay back the equivalent of 1 cow, plus a bit extra to cover interest on the debt, was because the debt obligation held no opportunity cost. In other words, the creditor did not have to hold on to the debt obligation until it matured in 3 months' time. Since the debtor was known by the entire community, other community members would accept the debt obligation as payment, and the creditor could immediately buy goods and services with it. It was as good as cash. Debt obligations did therefore not bear any interest.
John, you're a good builder. Please would you build me a hut, in exchange for a debt obligation from Peter, which is worth 1 cow?
Yes, I'll build you a hut, in exchange for Peter's debt obligation worth 1 cow.
Debt obligations, also called credit money, were passed on from person to person as payment for goods and services. When a debt obligation became due, the current holder of the debt obligation would claim the debt from the person that created and signed the debt obligation. The debtor would settle the debt with an equivalent amount of credit money, which the debtor had earned since creating the debt obligation a few months earlier. In these communities, very few people ever defaulted on their debt obligations. This was because fellow traders knew each other well and could judge each other's credit risk accurately. Traders also made sure to meet their debt obligations, as not doing so made future trading impossible. The credit money used by these communities was interest-free, as the money was not borrowed from anyone. There were no deposit holders to pay interest to. In economic jargon, there was no opportunity cost, and virtually no credit risk, which made it mathematically illogical to charge interest. The amount of debt obligations that any trader could create was limited to how much fellow traders were willing to accept. Therefore, the amount of credit money circulating in a community was always limited by the creditworthiness of the community. Also, the amount of credit money in circulation always matched the amount of products and services traded in the community. Credit money was therefore inflation-free. Once these communities wanted to expand their trade to distant communities, they couldn't accept debt obligations as payment from traders in these distant communities, as they couldn't judge the credit risk of people they did not know. Bartering was not a solution. It was impractical and could only be used on rare occasions. These communities considered using high-value durable items, such as gold or silver, to trade with strangers. But they thought it through and quickly realized the following. If the community decided to use gold to trade with strangers, the value of gold would go up immediately. Gold mining would become much more viable and gold prospecting would increase. When new gold deposits were discovered, the prospector's wealth would suddenly increase tremendously. Since the value of goods and services traded in the communities would remain unchanged, while the supply of gold money increased, inflation would occur, reducing the wealth of all community members in the same proportion. But even after inflation, the prospector's wealth would still have increased drastically, while the rest of the community's wealth would have decreased drastically. By using gold as money, community members would be gambling with their wealth. Another important consequence would be interest. Since gold money is by definition scarce, there would not be enough gold money for everyone to trade their goods and services with. Those that are short of gold money would have to borrow it from the few that hold the gold supply, and pay them interest for doing so. Gold money would introduce interest to their society. Over time the effects of inflation and interest would erode the wealth of the poor and middle classes. Even though the wealthy would also be subject to inflation, their newly found interest earnings would more than compensate for inflation. And as the poor and middle classes become poorer, they would be willing to work for less and less money, providing cheaper labor for the wealthy. These communities realized that gold money would wreak economic and social havoc to their communities. Gold-backed money produces inflation. Gold-backed money introduces interest. Gold-backed money redistributes wealth disproportionately to the production ability of the community. The resulting low income equality leads to an increase in crime, violence and social unrest. In contrast to what some economists say, gold-backed money does not remove credit risk. The scarcity of gold leads to borrowing, which introduces credit risk back into the equation. Gold money was clearly not an option, so these communities came together and devised a plan to create a central credit clearinghouse, to extend their credit money systems to strangers in distant communities. The credit clearinghouse would serve as a middleman between traders, credit vetting every trader to determine how much debt obligations they could have, and collecting a credit risk insurance premium from every trader, to cover any payment default by a trader on its debt obligations. The credit clearinghouse therefore functioned almost exactly like a modern bank, except there were no deposit holders, and no interest payments. For example, during the Middle Ages, a credit clearinghouse served a large region constituting many communities. The credit clearinghouse cleared the region's debt obligations from credit risk, which allowed traders to accept debt obligation from strangers. It worked as follows. People from the region would apply for debt obligations with the credit clearinghouse. These debt obligations had to be paid back at the end of a credit term.
Hi there. I'd like to apply for a loan.
Sure. Please complete this application form. Thank you. We'll review your application. Please come back next week.
The credit clearinghouse would determine how much debt obligations the applicant was worth, based on factors like income, skills and references. The credit clearinghouse would also judge the credit risk of the applicant to determine a credit risk insurance premium.
We've reviewed your application and approved debt obligations worth 1,000 trade units. The debt obligations are repayable after 1 year. Your credit risk insurance premium is 1% of the value of your debt obligations, which comes to 10 trade units.
Here's my credit risk premium.
Credit risk insurance premiums were kept in a fund, to cover any payment defaults by debtors.
Here's your debt obligations.
Thank you.
The credit clearinghouse was responsible for recovering all debt obligations it issued. Upon recovery, debt obligations were destroyed as they had effectively expired. Any unrecoverable amounts were recovered from the credit risk insurance fund. If a debtor were late with repaying its debt obligations, the debtor's future credit risk premiums would go up. If the debtor defaulted, it would not be able to apply for more debt obligations until it had cleared its bad debt record. Community members audited the credit clearinghouse to make sure that every debt obligation issued was recovered after its credit term, either from the debtor it was issued to, or the credit risk insurance fund. Credit clearinghouses allowed communities to expand their credit money systems to large regions. Each region or nation therefore had its own currency. When a trader in one country wanted to buy goods and services from a trader in another country, the trader had to exchange its own currency for the foreign currency. At a foreign exchange house, just like we do in the 21st century, credit money facilitated local and international trade without introducing inflation or interest to economies. So why did we start using gold and silver to trade our goods and services with? We were forced to. During the 15th century, leaders across Europe and China started declaring gold and silver as the only legal tender for paying taxes, and outlawed credit money. From that point onwards, inflation and interest became part of our society. Those that did not hold enough gold to trade their goods and services with, had to rent it from the few that held the gold supply. From that point onwards, interest continually transferred money from the majority to a wealthy minority, concentrating wealth in the hands of a few. Eventually, the unsustainable gold money system started showing cracks, But instead of going back to interest-free credit money, and enjoying a fair and stable money system, fractional reserve banking was created. It allowed banks to lend out credit money, at interest. With the interest earned on credit money, paid over to deposit holders of banks, even though deposit holders' money is effectively not lent out. The seeming complexity of fractional reserve banking obscures the fact that banks do not effectively lend out deposit holders' money, but issue borrowers with credit money. The unreasonable flow of money from the majority to a wealthy minority, therefore continues under an interest-bearing credit money system. We might no longer be at the mercy of the inflation produced by the discovery of new gold deposits, but by charging interest on credit money, inflation is introduced once again. As credit money is created out of debt, all our money in circulation carries interest. Therefore, our money supply needs to constantly expand to keep up with our interest charges, even when the amount of products and services traded in the economy remains constant. Therefore, interest-bearing credit money causes inflation. Interest-bearing money has had a powerful and pervasive effect on society over the last 500 years. Concentration of wealth in the hands of a few. Business dominated by a wealthy minority. Debt enslavement of the majority. Inflation, bankruptcies and recessions are mathematically inevitable. Environmental destruction at the hands of desperate debt slaves. Taxes inflated because of interest on government debt. The majority of humans are enslaved to a wealthy minority, through the mechanism of interest. Over the millennia, humanity has gone back and forth between centuries of slavery and centuries of freedom. Let's spread the logic so we can free ourselves once again. It's fitting that humanity's first recorded word for freedom was a word that described freedom from interest. The word was amagi. Interest-free credit money is legal in most countries. Therefore, we can once again create our own interest-free credit money systems as a solution to our current economic crises. To learn more about the problem of interest, its negative consequences and the interest-free solution that is freeing people, go to www.amagi.co.za and www.naturalex.org.